David Christophilly, thank you so much for your
Thank you,
time.
Andrea. Thanks for having us.
Well, moving on, make no mistake, Europe is caught in a climate showdown. The EU's Green Deal was meant to be one of the world's most ambitious climate policies to get to net zero by 2050 and won hearts and minds when announced 5 years ago. Now it's toxic though. The cost of living crunch, farmers protesting and tractors, and a populist right surging. For more, I'm joined by Ralph Schoelhammer, an economist and political theorist from Vienna. Ralph, bring us up to the speed. What are the big changes here at the centre of this clash?
Well, I think the big changes are that political change is happening. This has become a populist backlash against net zero. It has become a populist backlash, as you just mentioned, against a very ambitious green agenda. And whatever one thinks about it, the problem was always the promise was being made that you can have the green agenda and simultaneously increase people's living standards. And now it's becoming obvious that actually you can only fulfill the green promises if you reduce people's living standards, and most people are not up for it.
That's a very succinct answer. In terms of those who aren't watching how the EU is working here, who are the key players in this debate as it stands, and where do they currently stand?
Well, the key players increasingly have become the people, and I don't mean this in a populist sense. It's just they have been affected the most, and we've seen this particularly since 2022. We had an energy crisis that was entirely unforeseen, and now even in Australia, food security is an issue again. I find this quite fascinating. For so long, we simply took full shelves in the supermarkets for granted, but there is a growing consciousness about that all that stuff needs to come from somewhere, and that somewhere is becoming more popular in people's imaginations. So the European farmers, the European agricultural sector is very diverse, right? The French farmers are different from the German farmers, are different from the Polish farmers, but they generally have public support because the idea is that they are food producers. Sometimes I have to admit there is a tendency to romanticize it a little bit. I think the farmers partially reject that, but that's just politics. But the idea that you cannot take these things for granted and that food does not come from the supermarket, but there is a step before that, is becoming more conscious in people's imaginations, and this has political consequences.
Now, last week, the EU presidential election debate, current EU boss Ursula von der Leyen accused of watering down the bill. Why is that sentiment then shifting? Are they now finally hearing what the people want?
Well, that'd be the optimistic interpretation. I think the true one is there are elections in June. There are elections all over Europe this year and next year. And you know how it is. Once it becomes clear that people are going to the polls, you have to try to pacify them at least a little bit. If you look at the degree to which the green agenda has been kind of integrated into the entire bureaucratic process, it is at this point, it doesn't really matter who's in power, right? This is going to be an issue that has permeated the entire permanent bureaucracy. So this is going to be a much longer struggle than people can imagine.
Where does this all land after those elections?
Well,
Give us your little, your crystal ball here.
Well, the crystal ball is very simple. Europe has to make a choice, right? It can continue down this path, which is fine, but it will mean that Europeans will get poorer. Or it can try to change course and then thereby maintain its wealth and potentially kind of jump back on a road to prosperity. And just to be very clear about this, this was an experiment that started in the early 2000s, and now we have the results. In some countries, quite stark. Germany is usually the best example, but we see it in France, we see it in Ireland and other areas. And I think people are now waking up to the fact that this is not what it was, that the outcome is not what was promised. And people want to change course, but as we all know, it's the same in Australia. Usually these things take much, much longer than one anticipates.
There's obviously a number of factors, though, that have come into play here. You've got, Ukraine and the like, different, economic conditions. Do you think if we weren't stuck in a cost of living crisis around the world that we wouldn't see this level of greenlash?
I think that is true, but we should not mix up causes and symptoms. Right, the problem what Ukraine kind of highlighted was, apart from the horrific fact of the war, is that it was a little bit kind of a sneaky way to do the green agenda by simply outsourcing everything else. So you said, okay, we don't do energy, we import it from Russia. We don't do manufacturing, we import it from China. So we don't do agriculture, we import it from Brazil. Now you can do this, especially if the world is a safe place, right? If trade routes are open, if globalization is flourishing. But as soon as this fine-balanced fine-tuned machine is starting to sputter, as it is right now, and people are increasingly thrown back to produce things domestically, and then you find out you don't have anything to produce domestically, that's when the problems start to accumulate, and this is what we see right now.
So when did you touch down in Australia for beef?
On Sunday. 15,000 kilometres.
15,000 kilometres, those long flights, aren't they horrible?
Well, it's to my great surprise, the plane was almost empty, but I'm glad you touched on this, right? It's one of the things I find this fantastic, like the fact that you can travel the world at a very reasonable price, connect people, get together, that is a good thing. And what you see, again, all over the West under the guise of the green agenda is that you want to reduce people to have that possibility. And you know, ideas, innovation comes from connecting people, comes from getting together. The more difficult you make this, the less innovation you will have.
So what can Australia learn from the EU's experiences, to sum it up, I guess?
Well, I think the Australians should take a look at the United States from 2009 on and Europe from 2009 on, because the United States themselves had an agricultural and energy revolution, particularly with fracking and shale. And I think the Australians have to take a close look which country, which area performed better over the last 15 years. And the evidence is in the United States. The United States did much better. The Australians have many of the same conditions as the US. You are blessed with fertile land. You are blessed with natural resources. You are blessed with almost unlimited access to energy. The only problem is that you are unwilling, if I might say so, to use it. And I think this is the decision Australians have to make. You could be much richer in the future than you are now if you fully employ everything that is at your disposal. And I hope that the Australians will make that choice in the future.
Well, it's a nice note to end on. Thank you so much, Ralph Schoelhammer.
Thanks for having me.
Enjoy the rest of Beef Australia. Well, after the break, the 3D shutdown. Telstra today announcing they're going to be delaying it a couple of months. Stay with us.